Hey everybody, welcome back to A Matter of Life and Maiden, the podcast of the Beast. I am Joe Labriola, and this is episode 49 of the podcast. 49 episodes deep into this thing. After this is episode 50, and it's going to be a big episode, an exciting episode, so I'm ready for that. But 49, what is episode 49 going to be about? Well, on Metal Hammer recently, Steve did a review. Steve Harris, the bassist from Iron Maiden, did a review um, of some albums, and they asked him a question about going back and reviewing some of these past albums, and they brought up No Prayer for the Dying, and basically said on this little segment they have on Metal Hammer, like quote unquote metal albums that are better than what people believe or something like that, to that effect. And obviously he defended No Prayer, Steve. And he was basically saying some things about it which are kind of interesting. And Matt and I kind of talked about this on the podcast before, like years ago, and we haven't really talked about it much recently, or I haven't really talked about it much recently, but I kind of want to um, go back to it here for a moment, where just because Matt and I have said these things over the, almost 50 episodes deep that we have in the podcast now, since the inception of this back in the summer of 2018, 8 years, over 8 years. Just because we like certain things about Iron Maiden doesn't mean that every single person likes the same stuff that we like. And that's great. Like, you don't have to. I know a lot of people, get a little upset, or they've gotten a little upset when we've said some things about certain albums, and like, we don't mean to offend or hurt anyone. That's not what we try to do. It's not what we aspire to do. It's not intentional. We're just throwing out our life experience, hence A Matter of Life and Maiden. This is what we think is the best or the weakest or the strongest based on our experiences, our life experiences with these records, these songs, how Maiden has affected our lives individually and collectively together as friends, like in our friendship, and et cetera, down the line. So, to kind of echo what Matt said when we were doing the No Prayer episode in the podcast, he was like, I don't mean to like bash anybody out there who says that No Prayer for the Dying is their favorite record. Like, maybe it was the first Iron Maiden album that you listened to and you became a fan, and you have a really sentimental space in your heart or your mind or your soul for that record, and that's great. If it is, awesome. But like, for us, it's not that. We don't have that sentimental attachment to it. And we were fortunate enough to come at a time where we we had everything from the inception of the band, from the original LP all the way up to that point, Dance of Death. So we had a lot of stuff to look at and kind of gauge. And just for us, we never really, that stuff never bubbled to the surface for us like the other records did. The 90s stuff never really bubbled to the surface for us like the 80s material or the reunion to the present stuff. So if it is your favorite album, like I said, I mean, great. We said it in the comments during that episode too, like, tell us why. Tell us why it is. And I was jokingly like, I don't see how you could, but I mean, that's just my opinion. Just because I don't think it's the best album ever doesn't mean that you don't have to have that opinion. And I would be really interested to see why people dig it. I mean, I read stuff all the time. I mean, as a musician and as a guitar player and somebody who likes music, I need to have guitar and harmony and melody and good lyrics and good choruses and good stuff. Some people like more straight driving music. And I mean, I've kind of grown into that too. Like, I want to bring that out too. Like, Matt and I, when we started playing guitar together, and Matt had, started a couple years before I did, like 2.5 years before I started playing, like, we were always chasing, I don't want to say perfection, but almost. Like, we really wanted emotional feel, stuff that gave us, like, gravity and was epic and dynamic, and there was a bunch of movements and different changes in the song, uniqueness, we are very prog. We're just progressive. We're just progressive as musicians. We like progressive music. So, I mean, outside of Maiden, we talked about this on the podcast before. Like some of our favorite bands are like Dream Theater, Queensryche, Jethro Tull, Yes, Rush, prog rock and prog metal bands. Um, Newer guys like Trivium and stuff like that. You know, they were some of our favorite bands. They are some of our favorite bands. King Crimson, Opeth, bands like that, Mastodons. They have these kind of interesting, unique elements about them that are fascinating and kind of draw us in. So that's why we like them. We like guitar solos. We like guitar harmonies. We like dual guitars. We like we like progressive music. And I think to kind of encapsulate that, then put it in a bottle and kind of paraphrase and rephrase and come back to the present now in the summer of 2026, August 2026, um, that's probably why we just didn't like No Prayer as much. Because we don't like the back to the basics, stripped down stuff. Because we saw Maiden from Inception to Dance of Death and saw what they could do progressive music wise in our eyes. And for us, we just feel like that their vision, as they got more and more into their careers and became more and more progressive musicians, it just fit what we like more, and that's why they're one of our favorite bands. So, some people like just regular pop music. Some people like punk. Some people like thrash. Some people like grunge. Some people like country music. Some people like rap. Some people like. There's so many different genres of rock and rap and grunge and country, and they all have all these different subgenres. But for us, Iron Maiden is basically just heaven. I mean, it's everything that we want. It's progressive. It's rock and roll. It's heavy metal. It's technical. It's melodic. It's synergistic. It's harmonizing. It's lyrically beautiful. They sing about things that we love from a literary standpoint, a life standpoint, a historical standpoint, sci-fi standpoint. It's who we are as people, and that's why we love some of these other records. And I hit that on the head again. Like No Prayer didn't really do that. No Prayer was kind of derivative from the norm. And if you look at it that way, I mean that's a strength. A strength that it's unlike Maiden. It's not like the stuff that came before it. And for that, I mean, definitely a bold approach from the guys to do it that way. I personally, and I know Matt would echo the same thing, just don't think it was successful. I don't think it was the kind of music that I thought was good, or that I think is good. And that's all we're trying to say. But anyway, on that Metal Hammer review, Steve basically said, when they were talking to him about, what do you think about No Prayer? Why do you think people think it's the weakest, etc., etc.? He kind of just gave his own thoughts. And he was just like, I think it's a really strong album. He pointed out that they came on the back of a run of increasingly ambitious albums and tours. I mean, they had just come off of Power Slave, Somewhere in Time, Seventh Son. Big, ambitious, powerful tours. And then he said, at the time, we had gotten so big with all the grandiose shows that we were trying to go back to basics a little bit. So, stripping it down, like Matt and I had talked about previously. In other words, kind of like what I just said at the beginning of this, they didn't want it to be big and grandiose and epic and super progressive, which I don't know why you wouldn't want to do that, but I think they were just tired. They were just a little burnt out. And they figured, hey, look, we can still make good music. We just want to keep it simpler. I don't think that was the right thing to do, and obviously they would come to believe that as well. But at that time, that's what they had decided to do. And they go on to talk about the album and interview Steve, talking about like the vocal arrangements and kind of how they stripped it down and things like that. And Steve said, if I'm being honest, I think it was slightly influenced by Bruce Dickinson's solo album, Tattooed Millionaire, which was also released in 1990, where he was trying to get a bit more basic, Steve said. There are a couple songs on there where he sings a bit rougher, and I was thinking I could write something where he could sing with that gruff delivery as well. So, Matt and I talked about this, and Matt initially thought, and we had both kind of agreed, that maybe Bruce, blew his voice out during the touring cycle for all those big ambitious shows, i.e., Power Slave, Somewhere in Time, and Seventh Son, tour supporting those records. Maybe he took that Bear approach, and to a certain extent, I think he did. And I think he was still in Maiden too, so like they were all just trying to make it simplistic, not as grandiose, bare bones, etc. And as we see, I don't think it was successful, but it's interesting to see Steve kind of like coming back and talking about these things. And then when they were talking about like the recording of the album and how they were trying to make it feel, not before he kind of talks about like what it was supposed to be about, and talks about how it was kind of slightly inspired by Tattooed Millionaire. And as far as the recording of it goes, and like the mixing and everything, Steve went on to say, we were trying to make it sound like a live album, which is why we got the Rolling Stones mobile studio in to record live in a barn Nerd Studios. We probably should have put audience noise on it, because it would have sounded more like a proper live album. We did that with the Telegunner video, and it made a big difference. In other words, in a matter of speaking, he's defending it, and he said he's proud of it, because you have to be proud of what you put out at the time, but he's basically saying, yeah, we could have did that a little bit better. That mixing part and that live feel wasn't as strong as he would have liked. So that's kind of what he was saying there about it. And then he goes on to say, I listened to it recently and I thought this was really good. I was going for a 20th century Russian composer Sergei Prokofiev kind of vibe, which I felt I got, but it got slagged off anyway. That was like Mother Russia. He was listening to Mother Russia, the song. Because Mother Russia, I mean, if you listen to some of the reviews Matt and I gave it, it's, again, though, to kind of encapsulate the record, and looking at that song from a standpoint where it's a stripped down, quote unquote, epic, it makes sense in that kind of ideology where, like, hey, we don't want to be too progressive. We don't want to be too grandiose. We don't want to be too flashy. We don't want to be too technical. We don't want to be too dynamic. Which, like Matt and I had talked about on the podcast before, like Somewhere in Time and Seventh Son back in the day weren't really super well received over here. Not as much as like Power Slave, Number of the Beast, Peace of Mind. Those records, like they weren't well received or as well received in the States as, a couple previous albums, which is a shame, because looking at them now and like Maiden going back and being like, yeah, that they were great. In hindsight, all these years later, talking about like, 35, 40 years later, some of these records, it's awesome to see that they've come full circle now, and it's completely loved and embraced. And like those records, Seventh Son and Somewhere in Time, are like on the top of a lot of Maiden's catalogs. And maybe, or Maiden, not Maiden catalogs, but Maiden reviews or Maiden lists of their entire catalog is what I meant to say, where they're like at the top. And maybe in a few years, No Prayer might circle back and come to the top. I would think, I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no for that. And the only reason I say that is because had Maiden stayed a trajectory where they were kind of like the same sounding band as they were in the 90s, with stuff like No Prayer, I don't think they would have survived. And the reason I say that is, look at grunge music, look at punk music, look at the hair metal bands that came out like in the mid to late 80s, and look what happened to them. Like, they're all basically gone. There is no survival element to that. You have to be progressive, unique, and different to make it. Even pop artists and stuff, like, they're always trying to change it up and be different and unique, and that's what makes them work. But at the same time, they're also kind of containing a foundation from the past that they never really tamper with. Because if you tamper with the foundation, you mess it up, and one of those blocks comes out, the whole foundation collapses from underneath you. And I think this is what happened to Maiden in the 90s. I think with this one, they tried to go back to the bare bones approach, make it simpler, less sophisticated, less busy, less progressive. And for them, it took away who they are, because the reality is they were trying to change their identity for a moment. while keeping a lot of it. I mean, they couldn't completely do it because you had, like, Run Silent, Run Deep, Bring Your Daughter to the Slaughters in here. No Prayer for the Dying. A couple of these songs that are kind of like interesting, trying to fit into that grunge and 90s bare bones approach of the 90s, which came and basically took everybody by storm. Really, I mean, demolished metal and rock and roll music for a while, like the advent of grunge, until like the late 90s, early 2000s, when metal made a comeback and rock made a comeback. Judas Priest made a huge comeback. Dio made a huge comeback. Maiden made a huge comeback, etc., etc. And I think that's what happened. All these guys were trying to fall into that loop. It was just a trap. I mean, look at like Metallica. They came out with like Load and Reload, and some people dig those albums. I'm not personally a fan because I like progressive music. So like, I like the Kill 'Em All and the Ride the Lightnings and the Master of Puppets and the Injustice for All. That's what I like. And, to a certain extent, the Black Album, but that's kind of when they were tapering off into more quote-unquote popular territory. And then they started to go that route. Like, they changed their trajectory. So the 90s was tough for all metal music. Maiden was no exception. I mean, like, they had to change it up. And I think it was so alien and foreign to them as opposed to some of these other bands. I think it was alien and foreign to everyone. But I think it was so alien and foreign to Maiden because they truly, really wanted to write things that were deeper and stronger and more progressive. And that's why Adrian left. He was like, I don't like this album. It's just not good. It's just not good. I'm leaving. We could have one or two duds on a record, but like, the entire album is trash. I can hear Adrian saying that because he's so meticulous and he's like so in tune with sound and harmony and all the stuff I talked about at the beginning of this, of what I like musically. But he was like, I'm out. Which makes sense when you think about it in that context. It makes perfect sense. And they continue to question Steve, like during this interview, about No Prayer. And he defends it, and he goes on to say, he looks at it like Jethro Tull's album, A Passion Play, that got slagged off on. And it says, Tool main man Ian Anderson didn't want to play the UK anymore, Steve said. If it were me, I would have embraced it. I would have gotten all the journalists into one room and piled into them, and not physically, but verbally. If someone says they don't like something, that makes me embrace it even more, he says. You've got to believe in what you do, don't you? Which, I understand where he's coming from at that point. Like, at that point in time, that's what he believed he should have done. Trying to survive, trying to be different, trying to make something unique and kind of like out of left field that wasn't the same as Maiden had done before with their formula, to kind of fit into the scene at the time. So, and I think if you look at it from that standpoint, I understand what he's saying. But I guess it's a cultural shift too, because Maiden was founded on heavy metal. Like when they came out in 1980 with the first album, that was so revolutionary. The new wave of British heavy metal. No one had ever heard anything like that. And then you cement yourselves for over a decade or more. And then the 90s come and it's grunge and it's punk and stuff, and you're like, well, what's going on? And then you're kind of like not looked at because you're not the cool new stuff anymore. So you had to adapt and evolve. And the Maiden guys couldn't do that. I mean, people just weren't interested in the stuff that I talked about at that time. A lot of people. They weren't interested in awesome guitar solos and playing and things like that. It was too technical. It was too extreme. They wanted something very simple. That's why punk and grunge flourished at that time period. And Maiden tried to do that. But that's, I'll say again, I know Steve defended this album, but that's not who they are. And to even go off of what he said, like when he was talking about Jethro Tull and like a Passion Play and stuff, I mean, Passion Play was a concept album. Then they did a couple records after that, until they got to like the Albion cycle, and they did Songs from the Wood, Songs from the Wood. I'm trying to think of the albums. They're escaping me right now, but that whole cycle, Songs from the Wood, Heavy Horses, and Stormwatch, those three records, they kind of re-identified themselves, Jethro Tull. And then they did the A album, which was actually supposed to be an Ian Anderson solo album, and they changed it. Came back with Broadsword and the Beast, which I thought was amazing. did Under Wraps, which is another Then came back with like Crest of a Knave, which won a Grammy. Like it beat Metallica's And Justice for All in the 80s, like 1988. But the difference was all bands had these ups and downs. The difference between Jethro Tull and Maiden was Tull, they're a lot older. They're like a decade or more removed, 10 to 12, 13 years removed from when Maiden formed and started putting albums and stuff out. So, kind of the same thing. They had this really big surge for like a decade or more. People wanted something different. New wave of British heavy metal stuff. They took a little bit of a turn, then started doing like a folky approach. Ups and downs, ups and downs. The difference was with like Jethro Tull, after they did like that Christmas album in the early 2000s, they were done for like almost 20 years. And then in 2022, Ian Anderson, who's pretty much Jethro Tull now, like his name is synonymous with Jethro Tull because all the members have come and gone. Nobody's really the same anymore. Ian Anderson pretty much is Jethro Tull now. And I love Martin Barre. I saw Martin Barre a couple years ago play a concert, about 3 years ago now. And he played a bunch of stuff from the catalog, like the really good, like the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, like all the really good stuff. Stuff from Aqualung, stuff from Thick as a Brick, stuff from Broadsword and the Beast, stuff from Crest from a Knave. It was awesome. I loved it. And it was so cool to see that. Songs from the Wood, played a couple songs from that. Stormwatch, Heavy Horses, the Albion Cycle. And it was awesome to see. But Ian Anderson, now that he's kind of like the sole kind of like holder of the rights to the name, he came out with 3 albums in the last couple of years that have been absolutely amazing. Why though? Because he went back to the roots. He went back to the roots. No more screwing around, doing what he's good at, making music off of what he believes in and focuses on and follows that identity. The Zealot Gene, amazing album. Amazing. Rogue Float, amazing. Amazing album. Curious Ruminant, amazing. 3 Jethro Tull albums. And if you look at Maiden in that same trajectory after the 90s, and No Prayer is the start of that, I think the albums get a little bit better as they go. And then you take a step back with like Virtual 11. So like No Prayer, I think is still the worst or the weakest. Fear the Dark's an improvement, still not that great. X Factor's an even bigger improvement. That's probably the best album of the 90s for Maiden. Then a little bit of a step back with Virtual 11. Just because, again, they're trying to explore these different ways to sound different and unique in an era that doesn't appreciate the stuff that they had churned out in the 80s. I mean, I hate to say that, but that's the truth. That's why No Prayer is looked at the way it was. If Maiden was a different band, if Maiden was like just a regular grunge band or a punk band or, kind of like a pseudo-punk metal band or something like that, maybe even like kind of like a Danzig, like early Danzig kind of feel, No Prayer might not have been that bad when you look at it that way. Look at like Danzig 1, the first album, and take No Prayer. I mean, there's a lot of similarities there. There's a lot of similarities there between those 2 records. I personally think Danzig 1 is a better album than No Prayer. But when I look at it, I know who Glenn Danzig is. I know he's going to be singing like a more bluesy vocal that's more in the vein of rock, not quite metal, but like a bluesy rock kind of vocal with kind of like a punk-inspired thematic to it. When you look at like the song Mother, and you look at like some of their songs like Not of This World, and things like that, and Twist a Cane from that record, they're very bluesy, kind of catchy. There's not really any real epic guitar solos in them, but they're good. So if you're looking at it from that standpoint, if Maiden was a band like that, then No Prayer could be, for some people, a 10 out of 10 album. And for some people it is, even with their current catalog. But I guess my thing is I have an issue where I don't believe it really fits into Maiden's identity and who they are. But I will say this, to kind of like, I don't want to say denounce myself, but kind of like make myself look a little hypocritical. I mean that in an overall standpoint. Who they are overall. Who they are through their entire catalog to this point. But if that's who they were in the 90s, then that's who they were. And that's what Steve is trying to say. We were proud of that at the time. I was proud of that at the time. And like I said, I wasn't there. How can I fault the guy? If that's what he really thought was great at the time, then that's what he thought was great. In the back of his mind, trying to be himself, trying to keep the foundation, but also trying to survive in a time period where that stuff wasn't looked at as excellent. And by that stuff, I mean Somewhere in Time and Seventh Son. People weren't looking at it as that great in the States, some other places. So in his mind, he's thinking, how am I going to survive with this? The touring killed us. I'm tired. I just want to go make music and have fun and have a good time and do something that makes me feel good. And if it made him feel good at the time, that's what happened. Right? So he can't really sit here and nitpick everything like he's a human being. But I think going back and looking at it, like the guys realize, obviously, that, universally, it's just not an album that a lot of people like. Most Maiden fans don't like it because, and I guess looking at it from kind of like a statistics standpoint, most Maiden fans are kind of like me, Matt, and a lot of the other people that I've come across at concerts or tours or, out in the world on my adventures in life. They kind of like the more epic stuff. They like the 80s stuff. They like the reunion stuff. They like a mix of both, which is kind of like where Matt and I are at. We like a lot of the 80s stuff and the new reunion stuff. We like it. We like that stuff. Matt and I's least favorite era is the 90s. Then there's some people who really love the 90s. So like people love the 90s. There's some purists out there who are Paul purists and they don't like Bruce at all. They like the first two records and that's it. It's a guy I used to work with named Mike who loved Paul Di'Anno. He was like, Paul Di'Anno was the best. I love Iron Maiden and Killers. Bruce is okay. I like Bruce, but Paul's my favorite. Why for him though? I asked him because same kind of reasons we're talking about now. Because he got into the band, he knew Paul. Paul was the guy. Paul was the first voice he heard on that album. It was Paul for Iron Maiden and Paul for Killers. Those are his two favorite records. I mean, it makes sense, right? But anyway, I just wanted to jump on here and kind of talk about that for a moment and say, hey, look, if you like No Prayer for the Dying, awesome. Steve's defending it. He's not saying it's their best album. He's not saying it's his favorite. But I think for Steve, much like what I talked about in the episode prior to this, where I talked about like Zakk Wylde in the interview, it's like what you like. Pizza. You like pizza. I personally don't think that this comes close to any of the great to excellent Maiden albums. I don't. That's why I think it's one of the weaker ones. But if you think it's like top 5, your all-time favorite, hey, good for you. That's awesome. That's what's great about Iron Maiden. You can have a favorite. They have so much material that everybody can have a favorite record and a favorite album. It's not what I'm looking for when I put the record on. I want to hear stuff like Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, Hallowed Be Thy Name, Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, Alexander the Great, The Legacy, Passchendaele, Dance of Death, The Thin Line Between Love and Hate, excuse me, I was going to say Heaven on Earth. That's not it. That's a Yes album. Hell on Earth. Songs like that, songs that really encapsulate those things. The Red and the Black. Those are the songs that I want to hear. To Tame a Land. That's the stuff that I'm interested in. Yeah. So if you're not, like I hear a lot of people too, like they love short rockers. Like a lot of my friends who even like the old 80s stuff and the new reunion stuff. I talked to another guy when I was working in retail, and he was from New York. He was a big Maiden fan. He would come in and visit all the time because his girlfriend at the time worked at the same place I worked at, and he would always stop in and come over and talk to me because he knew I loved Iron Maiden and like metal music. He knew I'd play guitar and stuff, and just he would talk about the new albums. Like I remember when The Final Frontier came out, and he was like, I really like The Alchemist, and I really like Coming Home. I'm like, well, what'd you think about like The Talisman and When the Wild Wind Blows and Out of Avalon? He's like, oh, they were good. They were okay, a little too long for me. But he loved the record. He loved the album, but he loved the shorter songs. He wasn't a prog guy. And that's the beauty of Iron Maiden. Like, you can have it both ways. They make it where you can have it both ways. For a lot of people. And I think finding that sweet spot and that balance is what they try to do for themselves too. Because maybe they don't like all the epics. Maybe they don't want to make a really short album. But I will say, in the most recent years, of the band, they're leaning more towards the epics. They're becoming more of a progressive metal band, or they have become a progressive metal band. And that's what's so great. And that's why I still love them. That's why they're my favorite band, because they're still churning out songs that I think are absolutely beautiful and brilliant. And that's why they're awesome. Parchment is another one. Like, just outstanding music. And I can't wait to see what they have coming up next. But anyway, I just wanted to jump on here and record episode 49 and talk about that stuff that Steve was saying, and just let everybody know, go out there and listen to your favorite Maiden albums. Go out there and put them on. Talk about them. Share them with your friends, your family, people you're closest to. Have that camaraderie. Spread the word. Make sure that Maiden lives on forever, man, even after they're gone, like, decades from now. That's why I love them so much, because they are such a huge part of my life. And like I said, I try to get everybody I can involved in some of these things. There's a buddy of mine at work right now who's never really listened to Maiden. He likes classic rock. He likes like Pink Floyd and Zeppelin and all those things. He never really got too heavy into metal. He knows a couple Metallica songs. Doesn't know anything about, really metal. And I'm trying to get him into Maiden. I'm like, listen, dude, this stuff will blow your mind. It takes everything that's awesome about metal and rock and roll and everything that's awesome about history and science fiction and philosophy and religion and life and throws it into a band, and they're awesome. Listen to them. So I let him listen to the other day. We were rocking out to some Peace of Mind, Brave New World, and he was like, I really like the Trooper. I really like Wicker Man. He's not into the epic side yet. But he's getting in. Just like I had tried to do with, friends over the years and family, and how Matt got me into it. He was getting me into the shorter rockers, because at that time I liked punk. I didn't like metal music back then. So I was a person who probably would have loved No Prayer for the Dying had I not heard some of this other stuff. But I got into all these other things. But anyway, thanks for listening. Take care of yourselves out there. And remember, Maiden is life, the rest is history. I'll see you guys back here for episode 50. It's going to be a really cool episode. I'm really excited about it. So make sure you guys listen and tune into that one. Take care of yourselves. See you guys next time.